what is what is it for that you're designing your characters? This is probably one of the most important questions that it's the most important question that you can ask yourself before you start out with anything. So you see here, by the way, the program, the software, the app, whatever you want to call it, that I'm using right now, it's called Made with Mischief, and it has a pretty cool feature to it to where it has this endless canvas. I don't know how they do it. I don't know what sort of sorcery they use to make this, but it's pretty impressive. I'll kind of show that to you a little bit later on. I really like this because it has a pretty natural feel when it comes to drawing. But let's get back to this as I digressed a little bit. So as you can see here, we have a few different things that you could be designing this for. So you got video games, and if it's a video game that you're designing for, then you also want to figure out, are you designing for a 2D video game? Because if you are designing for a 2D video game to where you're doing pixel art, or you're doing something that some sort of graphic art, whether you're using a vector-based program like Illustrator, or if you're using something a bit more traditional like a Sketchbook Pro or Photoshop, obviously, then you're going to have to keep a few things into consideration, because that means that you're going to be doing a bit of animating, obviously, when it comes to characters, but also when it comes to that, it changes what your design is going to be. Because if it's 2D, go ahead and switch up colors here. If it is 2D, then some of the characteristics of 2D is that if you design it, you only have to design it once. So you will be designing and drawing once. Um, once, sorry. And if you're going to translate that design into 3D, then, and if you have to model it yourself, some of you may wind up modeling something yourself, you could put in a pretty good level of detail with the video games. Even if it's a 2D designed video game, you could put in a lot of detail. And you can kind of go all out as long as you don't mind animating the 2D portion of it. Now, once you model something in 3D, it's already modeled. You don't have to draw it again. That's why when you see a lot of concept art for video games that are 3D, you see all this rich detail, and if there's swords and pouches, and there's all this other stuff, and you could have ornaments on a character's hair, or everything is very hyper detailed because you only got to model it once, for the most part anyway. And if it's a 3D design or a sculpture, you only got to sculpt it out once. And with the 2D, as I said, as long as you don't mind animating it, then you're probably going to, depending on if it's a side scroller, chances are you, with some of the software that's out there now, you only have to really put that design out there once. So if you want to put a lot of detail on it, that's great. Now, if you're doing sequential art right here, sequential art, so that is comics, graphic novels. Graphic novels, I kind of abbreviate that a little bit. It's a web comic. And I know manga is a comic, but I like to put that down there anyway. So if you're doing that, you may want your design, you definitely, I don't want to say definitely, because I've seen a lot of artwork, especially when you get into a lot of the European comics, that have a high level of detail. But if you have a character that, I would say Wonder Woman is probably one of the best examples of character design. So the thing about Wonder Woman, as she started out, so as some of you may know, there were all these stars all over her trunks. So she had these blue trunks, but they had all these stars over here. And as you see, I stopped drawing this. Now this is okay, but imagine if you're drawing this panel after panel after panel after panel, and you're doing this. Now already you could see how labor intensive that is. And so if you have to draw her, let's say 6 panels, that means that you have to draw the trunks. You're going to have to draw the trunks, and it's a splash page right here, and maybe there's another. So these are your panels and your pages. If you're drawing that character like that, then, because we're not talking about detailing the face, you're talking about other things. So just imagine if you had a character that, for whatever reason, has some sort of, I'm just going to draw like a representation of the face up here. And let's just draw like a little quick body. But they have this big, elaborate cloak, and it's a wizard's cloak, and it has these tiny, little, intricate, magical runes all over it. So those are kind of things that you want to keep in mind, because you want your design to be as consistent as possible. You really want it to be very consistent, but is it going to be as practical for you? It may be. There are certain things that you may just want to show off how much detail you can do, and that's fine. There's no problem with that. The other thing that I've seen in sequential art over the past few years is people use 3D models. There are comics out right now where I know for a fact that they are using a program called Dash Studio, or they might be using Poser, and they are using that for their models. They're using it for backgrounds. That's a I think that really comes from animation, and a lot of 2D artists use that. I don't mind using backgrounds, especially if it's a contemporary setting. I'll go to SketchUp and grab some buildings or something like that, because I personally like consistency in the backgrounds, and I kind of look at it as a movie. So the way that I do sequential art, there's no wrong way to do it. But that's some of the things you want to keep in mind. That's a big difference when you have to draw something every single panel. So just imagine a good reason to use 3D art with your sequential art. And I know this isn't really character driven, but let's just say that you have a character that's standing inside. Let me go ahead and show this off a bit. Let me show you what I could do. Now I want you to watch what I just did. See that? See how I zoomed in on this? So I'm zoomed in. As a matter of fact, let me zoom out. And I'm going to draw right here. So let's say you got this character. We'll just draw a little character right here, and this character is talking to another character. But the point is that they're in front of this big, elaborate, maybe it's this sci-fi cathedral kind of place, and it's got these stained glass windows, has another stained glass windows, and maybe there's like, within the shot that you choose, there's these stained glass windows right here, and these big elaborate designs on it, because that's what your story needs. This cathedral, this sci-fi setting needs this big elaborate ornamental kind of set. You may not want to use that. You may not want to draw that. You're not going to want to draw that every single panel for an entire page or 4 pages or whatever. So it might behoove you to either learn some 3D modeling or download some of the stuff off of SketchUp. Just make sure you look at the appropriate uh, licenses to see if you can. And so, by the way, you saw I draw that whole scene right there, right? Look at that. And if I want to, I could even dive in a little bit further. I could dive in right here. I just want to show you what Made with Mischief can do, and I could just draw in again. So you obviously can see the detail possibilities of Made with Mischief. I don't know why I keep drawing the same figure over and over again, but anyway. Yeah, see that? And that was all contained between the L and the I. So speaking of which, if you are trying to get into animation, if you notice, a lot of animation is just it's very simple character design, and not even a lot of light and shadow. There is cell shading, of course, which is its own different topic. But when you're dealing with animation and you're just drawing a simple face, there usually isn't even a lot of details with the face. So you'll see characters, and if you look at, say, some old school animation, so you'll see this character like this, And back in the day, there really wasn't even any cell shading in animation. I don't even know when that came about, but there's no cell shading there. So now you have pretty simple versions of light and shadow, and you'll see like them possibly. I know that was probably the wrong thing to choose, but you'll just see like some shadow. Let's try this again. So you'll see things are very simplistic with shadow with animation because you got to keep drawing over and over and over and over again. And so you may not get, you're not going to be really getting a high level. There are ways to do detail, but that's something to keep in mind when you're doing animation, if you're looking at this character for animation, because just like with sequential art, if you don't want to draw, imagine drawing this cloak right here with all of these ornaments for, I don't know, 1,000 frames. So, and I forgot what recent anime it was where they just used a texture and they kind of animate. They put like the static texture almost that was with the anime. I forget what it was. I want to say it was something like the Count of Monte Cristo, or I forgot what it was, but I saw it and I thought it was just really interesting that they did that. But that's something that you want to keep in mind. And lastly, there is illustration. So if you're looking at something like Magic, if you're trying to just design a character for illustration and you're trying to draw this really elaborate battle scene, for your 2D, you can go all out with illustration, and we can go all out with detail. Lots of detail. Make it as heavily detailed as you want it to be because it's an illustration and you're only going to be drawing that illustration once. So if it's going to be an illustration for your portfolio piece or whatever, if you're designing a character for that, which I recommend designing your character before you try to put them into the scene. And I always say design first, illustrate second. And if you're going to have 3D elements in it with the background, or maybe you're going to paint over some 3D characters or some 3D models, that's fine, but you definitely need to know what you're designing first. So these are some of the things that I want you to ask yourself after you get done with this. At the end of this video, write it down somewhere, what you want, what are you designing it for, or just very least keep it in mind, what are you designing this for, because that's really going to change a lot of the way that we are going to approach every subject or approach every different kind of design. Once we really get into the drawing aspect of it, I am going to mix it up a little bit and just show you how I would approach the different, as I'm sure you've looked down and see all the stuff that we'll be designing. I'm going to be mixing that up a little bit and just showing you different approaches throughout the different characters respectively. So that's going to be in this video, and I will see you in the next video. Keep in mind what you're going to be designing for. Very, very important.